Imagine a darkness so complete, it feels less like an absence of light and more like a physical substance. Presses against your eyelids, heavy and damp. The air you breathe is thick with the scent of old stone, mildew, and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet. The ghost of old fear and spilled blood. You are in a cell deep beneath the ground. For how long, you can't be sure. Days and nights have blurred into a single, monotonous twilight, punctuated only by the distant clang of a heavy door or the scuttling of unseen things in the straw. But then, a new sound. Footsteps. Not the shuffling gait of the guard who brings your stale bread and water. These are different. Deliberate, firm, echoing down the stone corridor. There are several of them. They stop outside your cell. A key grinds in the rusty lock, a sound that makes every nerve in your body scream. The door groans open, spilling a rectangle of flickering torchlight onto the filthy floor. Silhouetted in the doorway are figures, robed and impassive. One of them holds a scroll. Another simply watches you, his face a mask of detached curiosity. You are hauled to your feet. Your limbs are stiff, your muscles atrophied from disuse. You're not told where you're going, but you know this isn't a release. This is an escalation. They lead you down a labyrinth of passages, the torchlight dancing on the damp walls, creating grotesque, moving shadows. The air grows colder, heavier, and then you enter a larger chamber. Your eyes, accustomed to the gloom, struggle to adjust to the multiple torches lining the walls. The room is cavernous. In the center, dominating the space, is an object. It's long, low, and made of thick, dark wood. At first glance, it might be a strange, oversized bed frame. But there are no cushions, no comfort. Only a stark, rectangular platform. At one end, a fixed bar. At the other, a wooden cylinder, a roller with thick ropes coiled around it. Protruding from this roller are long, sturdy levers. The whole construction is brutally simple, brutally functional. It is a machine designed for a single purpose. You've heard whispers of this thing in the terrified gossip of other prisoners. You've seen the after effects on those who have returned from a room like this, men and women who could no longer walk, whose arms hung limp and useless, whose eyes held a vacant, shattered look. You are standing in the presence of an instrument whose very name has become a synonym for agony. You are standing before the rack. Welcome to torture history. Today, we journey into the heart of one of humanity's most notorious inventions. We are not just looking at a piece of medieval engineering, we are dissecting an idea. The idea that truth can be physically extracted from a human body. That confession is a substance that can be squeezed from bone and sinew. Today, we explore the history, the mechanics, and the dark psychology of the rack. A truly painful device that became an infamous icon of judicial cruelty, particularly during the era of Inquisition torture. This is the story of how a simple wooden frame became a mechanism for breaking bodies, shattering minds, and shaping the very course of justice and faith for centuries. So settle in and let's descend into the chamber. Let's understand what it truly meant to be put to the question. To truly comprehend the rack, we must first strip it down to its terrifying essentials. It is, at its core, a machine of leverage and tension. The design, while varying slightly from region to region, followed a universal, brutal principle. The base was a large, rectangular wooden frame, typically raised a foot or two off the ground. The victim would be laid flat on their back upon this frame. Their wrists would be bound tightly to a fixed bar or rollers at one end. Their ankles would be similarly secured to ropes that were wound around a rotating cylinder, the windlass at the other end. This is the starting position, the moment of terrifying stillness before the procedure begins. Imagine the cold, rough wood against your back, the coarse bite of the ropes around your wrists and ankles. In the room, there is a quiet, bureaucratic diligence. The inquisitor or magistrate, a clerk with quill and ink at the ready, and the executioner or tormentor, as he was sometimes known. He is not a frenzied sadist from a horror film. He is often a professional, a craftsman of pain, a man who understands the precise mechanics of the human body and how to deconstruct it. The questioning begins. Did you conspire against the king? Did you renounce your faith in secret? Who were your accomplices? Your denials are met with a patient, almost weary sigh. The magistrate nods to the executioner. The first stage commences. The executioner takes his position at the levers of the windlass. He gives it a turn. The ropes pull taut. The first sensation is not yet agony. It is an intense, deep pulling strain. Every muscle in your body tenses against it. Your limbs, which have a natural, slight bend at the joints, are pulled unnaturally straight. The pressure is immense, a full-body clench that forces the air from your lungs in a gasp. This is the minor application of the torture, designed to frighten, to intimidate. The clerk's quill hovers over the parchment. Will you now confess? You refuse. perhaps out of principle, perhaps out of the desperate, foolish hope that this is as bad as it will get. The magistrate nods again. The executioner puts his weight into the lever. A loud creak echoes from the wooden windlass, a sound that will forever be seared into your memory. This is where the real pain begins. What is happening to your body? Your muscles, already stretched to their limit, begin to tear. Microscopic fibers rip apart, flooding your system with the searing chemical signals of extreme distress. Your ligaments, the tough, fibrous bands that hold your joints together, are being stretched like ancient, brittle rubber. The pain is no longer a strain. It is a sharp, white-hot fire erupting in your shoulders, your elbows, your hips, your knees, your ankles. It is a symphony of agony, with each joint screaming its own unique note of protest. You might scream, most do, but the sounds are often muffled by a gag, or simply lost in the stone-walled chamber, heard only by those who are inflicting the pain and those documenting it. The clerk makes a note. The accused cried out, resisted the question. Another turn of the lever, and then you hear it, a sound that is both sickeningly wet and horrifyingly loud. A dull, grisly pop. That is the sound of a joint dislocating. Your shoulder, most likely. The head of your humerus bone, ripped from the glenoid socket of your scapula. The pain is so absolute, so blinding, that for a moment, the world dissolves into a white haze. Your brain, overwhelmed by the sensory input, can barely form a coherent thought. All that exists is this new, profound, and fundamental wrongness in the architecture of your own body. This is the reality of the rack. It was not a machine of quick, clean pain. It was a machine of progressive anatomical destruction. After the first dislocation, the others would follow. The elbows, the hips, the knees. With each turn of the windlass, your body would be elongated, stretched by a reported, and perhaps exaggerated, distance of up to a foot. Your spine, a column of carefully stacked vertebrae, would be put under unimaginable tension. The cartilage discs between them would bulge and rupture. The vertebrae themselves could be pulled apart. At this point, you are no longer a person in the way you once understood. You are a vessel of pure, unadulterated sensation. The questions from the magistrate are distant, muffled sounds from another world. The only truth, the only reality, is the screaming of your own nerves. And it is in this state that the true purpose of the rack reveals itself. It is a machine designed to annihilate your will, to sever the connection between your mind and your body, leaving your consciousness adrift in an ocean of pain. The goal is to make the idea of continued resistance more terrifying than any confession, no matter how false or damning. This painful device was not a crude invention of the so-called Dark Ages. While instruments of stretching existed in antiquity, the Greeks had the tympanum and the Romans had the equuleus, or little horse. The rack as we know it rose to prominence in the later Middle Ages and the early modern period. It became a key instrument in a new kind of legal system, one that was becoming obsessed with a particular form of proof, the confession. In many European legal systems of the time, particularly those derived from Roman law, a confession was considered the regina probationum, the queen of proofs. Without a confession, or the testimony of at least two eyewitnesses, securing a conviction for a serious crime could be difficult. And for crimes of thought, heresy, witchcraft, treasonous conspiracy, there were rarely eyewitnesses. The crime took place in the hidden sanctum of a person's mind and soul. How do you prove what someone truly believes? How do you uncover a secret plot whispered in a locked room? The answer, for the authorities of the time, was judicial torture. This is a critical distinction to make. In the minds of the magistrates and inquisitors, this was not random, sadistic violence. It was a regulated, legal procedure. There were rules. Torture was typically only to be applied if there was already some evidence against the accused, the semi-plena probatio, or half-proof. It was not supposed to be fatal, though it often was, and a confession obtained under torture had to be repeated freely the next day, outside the torture chamber, to be considered valid, a grotesque legal fiction, as the victim knew that a retraction would simply mean another visit to the chamber and another session with the rack. Nowhere did this system of judicial torture become more infamous, more systematized, and more terrifyingly efficient than within the Spanish Inquisition. Established in 1478 by the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, the Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition was tasked with maintaining Catholic orthodoxy. Its primary targets were conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, often under duress, who were suspected of secretly practicing their ancestral faith, a heresy known as Judaizing. For the Spanish Inquisition, the rack, or el potro as it was known, became an essential tool. Imagine a converso merchant, arrested on the anonymous denunciation of a rival. He is brought before the inquisitors. He insists he is a good Christian, but the inquisitors are not convinced. They believe his soul is damned and that his heresy is a poison within the body of the state. They have a duty, as they see it, not only to secure a conviction but to save his soul by forcing a confession and repentance. He is taken to the chamber. The cold, methodical process begins. As the ropes tighten, the questions are not just about his own faith. This is where the true horror of the Inquisition torture system multiplies. Who else attended your secret Sabbaths? Did your wife light candles on Friday night? Did your neighbor, your friend, your own children join you in these forbidden rites? Under the unendurable agony of the rack, a person would say anything. They would confess to impossible crimes, to meeting with the devil, to flying on broomsticks. And, most tragically, they would name names. They would implicate friends, family, and neighbors, often innocent people, who would then be arrested and subjected to the same process. The rack was not just a tool for breaking one individual. It was a contagion, a mechanism for spreading the Inquisition's net of paranoia and accusation ever wider. It turned communities against themselves, transforming a society into a web of suspicion where any person could be your accuser, and you could be forced to become theirs. But Spain was not alone. In England, the use of the rack was technically illegal under common law. However, this legal nicety was easily circumvented by a royal warrant from the king or queen and their privy council. In the claustrophobic confines of the Tower of London, the rack was reserved for the most serious offenses against the state, treason and sedition. It was a tool of political power, used to extract the details of plots and conspiracies. Perhaps the most famous case is that of Guy Fawkes, the conspirator in the 1605 gunpowder plot to blow up Parliament. When he was captured, Fawkes was defiant, witty, and unyielding under initial interrogation. He famously stated he would have blown up the Scottish king and all his Scottish lords. King James I himself authorized the use of torture, writing that the gentler tortures should be used first, and then escalated to the worst. While the exact details are not recorded, it is almost certain that Fawkes was subjected to the rack. The proof lies in his signature. His first confession bears a signature written in a clear, controlled hand, Guido Fawkes. His final, detailed confession, made after his time in the Tower's torture chamber, is signed with a barely legible scrawl, a weak, spidery mark that looks like it was scratched onto the page by a man whose body was utterly broken. The strength of his will had been systematically dismantled, ligament by ligament. Yet, even in the face of such a terrifyingly effective painful device, there were those who resisted. The stories of defiance are as much a part of the history of the rack as the stories of capitulation. They speak to a resilience of the human spirit that is almost as incomprehensible as the cruelty that sought to break it. Consider the story of an Askew, a well-educated and fiercely articulate Protestant poet and preacher in the final years of King Henry VIII's reign. In a time when a woman's voice was expected to be silent on matters of theology, and was outspoken in her reformist beliefs, particularly her rejection of the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation. This made her a direct target of traditionalist factions at court, led by Bishop Stephen Gardiner and Lord Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley. They didn't just want to silence, and they believed she had powerful allies, perhaps even Queen Catherine Parr herself. They needed names. In 1546, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. She was interrogated relentlessly. She argued scripture and law with her accusers, her sharp mind refusing to be cowed. Frustrated, they turned to what they saw as their ultimate tool of persuasion. They took her to the chamber and strapped her to the rack. What happened next was not only horrific but also highly illegal, even by the standards of the day. The lieutenant of the Tower refused to continue racking a woman, so Bishop Gardiner and Lord Chancellor Wriothesley, two of the highest-ranking men in the kingdom, allegedly took the levers themselves. They turned the windlass with a fury born of frustration, determined to break her. They stretched her body until, by her own account, "They did put me on the rack because I confessed no ladies or gentlewomen to be of my opinion, and thereon they kept me a long time, and because I lay still and did not cry, my Lord Chancellor and Master Rich took pains to rack me with their own hands, till I was nigh dead." Her joints were dislocated. Her body was shattered. But her will was not. She gave them no names. She did not cry out in the way they expected. She fainted from the pain, but she did not break her silence. They had destroyed her body, but they could not seize the contents of her mind. When she was finally removed from the rack, she couldn't walk. Her spirit, however, remained intact. On the day of her execution, she had to be carried to the stake in a chair. Unable to stand, she was tied to the stake and burned alive. A martyr for her faith whose refusal to submit to the agony of the rack became a powerful legend in the Protestant Reformation. And Askew's story illuminates the central paradox of torture. It is a quest for control, but its ultimate outcome is always uncertain. The torturer believes he can master the victim's body and, through it, their will. But the human mind is not a simple lock to be picked. For every person who broke, there was an Askew who found a strength within themselves that even they might not have known they possessed. This brings us to the dark, claustrophobic psychology of the torture chamber itself. We must try to understand the minds of not only the victim, but also the perpetrator. What does it take for a person to inflict such systematic, calculated pain on another? It is easy and comforting to imagine the torturer as a monster, a cackling sadist who delights in suffering. And undoubtedly some were. But the historical reality is often more mundane, and therefore more disturbing. For many, this was a job. The executioner was a municipal employee, a state functionary. He had a set of tools, a set of procedures, and a list of tasks to complete. He might have seen himself as no different from a blacksmith or a carpenter, but his material was human flesh and bone. This bureaucratic detachment, this banality of evil, as Hannah Arendt would later call it, is perhaps the most chilling aspect. The ability to reduce a screaming, suffering human being to an object, a problem to be solved through the application of mechanical force. For the inquisitors and magistrates, the psychology was different, rooted in conviction and ideology. An inquisitor during the peak of the Inquisition torture era likely believed, with absolute sincerity, that he was doing God's work. He was not just punishing a heretic. He was a spiritual physician applying a harsh but necessary medicine to save a damned soul from eternal hellfire. The physical pain of the rack, however immense, was fleeting compared to the infinite agony of damnation. In his own mind, he might have seen his actions as a form of brutal mercy. He was also a guardian of social and religious order. Heresy was a cancer that could destroy Christendom. By extracting a confession and rooting out a network of heretics, he was protecting his entire world. This self-righteous certainty is what allowed men to turn the levers on and ask you, to document Guy Fawkes's agony, and to condemn thousands based on confessions born of pure torment. And what of the victim? Their psychological journey is one of utter disintegration. At first, there is defiance, a belief in one's own innocence or the strength of one's convictions. But the rack is designed to systematically dismantle that belief. The first stage is the assault on the body. The pain becomes the entire universe. It erases past and future, leaving only an eternal, agonizing present. The second stage is the assault on the self. The body, which has been your home your entire life, becomes a source of betrayal. It is the instrument of your own suffering. You begin to hate it, to wish you could separate your consciousness from the flesh that is screaming. This sense of dissociation is a common psychological response to extreme trauma. The final stage is the assault on truth itself. The questions of the Inquisitor, which at first seemed like a test of your integrity, become a lifeline. He is offering you a way out. All you have to do is give him the words he wants to hear. At this point, the concepts of truth and falsehood become meaningless luxuries. The only truth is the pain, and the only goal is to make it stop. The confession that is finally given is not a statement of fact. It is a surrender. It is the mind admitting that the body's agony has triumphed. The words spoken are not the victim's. They belong to the torturer, merely passing through the victim's lips. This is why the great French essayist Michel de Montaigne, writing in the 16th century, astutely observed, "It is a dangerous invention, this rack, and seems to be a test of endurance rather than of truth." The very instrument designed to reveal the ultimate truth was, in fact, a machine for manufacturing lies. So why did it end? If the rack was such an integral part of the legal and political systems for centuries, what caused its decline? The end of the rack was not a single event, but a slow, gradual fading, driven by the profound intellectual and philosophical shifts of the Enlightenment. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the rise of reason, skepticism, and a new focus on human rights and dignity. Thinkers like John Locke in England and the philosophes in France began to challenge the very foundations of absolute monarchy and religious dogma. In this new intellectual climate, the medieval logic of trial by ordeal and judicial torture began to seem not just cruel but irrational. The watershed moment came in 1764 with the publication of a short but explosive book, On Crimes and Punishments, by the Italian jurist Cesare Beccaria. Beccaria launched a frontal assault on the entire system of judicial torture. He argued, with devastating logic, that torture was barbaric, unjust, and, most importantly, utterly useless for discovering the truth. He pointed out the obvious flaw that we've discussed. A weak man will confess to a crime he did not commit to stop the pain, while a strong man might endure and be acquitted, even if he is guilty. Therefore, Beccaria concluded, the system punished the weak and innocent while potentially exonerating the strong and guilty. It was a test of the hardiness of one's nerves, not the veracity of one's statements. Beccaria's book spread like wildfire across Europe, translated into numerous languages and read by monarchs, reformers, and intellectuals, including Thomas Jefferson and John Adams in the American colonies. His arguments provided the intellectual ammunition for legal reformers. The idea that a just society could not be built on a foundation of state-sanctioned cruelty began to take hold. One by one, nations began to abolish judicial torture. Prussia was one of the first in 1754. Sweden followed in 1772. France, despite being a place where a particularly brutal form of torture known as la question was used, officially abolished it in the lead-up to the French Revolution in 1789. The infamous Spanish Inquisition, the institution most synonymous with Inquisition torture, was finally and fully suppressed in 1834. The age of the rack was over. The great wooden frames were dismantled, relegated to museums and the dark pages of history books. But has the shadow of the rack truly left us? The physical device is gone. No modern, civilized nation would openly admit to strapping its citizens to a wooden frame to extract a confession. But the core principle of the rack, the idea that inflicting pain and duress can force a person to yield information, is a ghost that has proven remarkably difficult to exorcise. When we hear debates about enhanced interrogation techniques, about waterboarding, stressed positions, or sleep deprivation, we are hearing echoes of the same logic that echoed in the Tower of London and the dungeons of the Spanish Inquisition. The language is sanitized, cloaked in clinical or bureaucratic terms, but the underlying premise is hauntingly familiar, that a person's physical or psychological breaking point is a gateway to the truth. History has shown us, time and again, the fallacy of this idea. The confessions obtained through such methods are notoriously unreliable. The information is often fabricated, tailored to what the victim believes the interrogator wants to hear. The use of such methods corrodes the very justice it claims to serve, blurring the line between the protector and the perpetrator, between a state governed by law and one governed by force. The rack, then, serves as more than just a historical curiosity. It is a monument to a dark chapter in our collective past, but it is also a profound and enduring warning. It warns us of the dangers of certainty, of the terrifying places that absolute conviction, whether religious or political, can lead. It warns us how easily a society can convince itself that its noble ends justify the most brutal of means. And it reminds us of the profound fragility of the human body, but also, in the stories of those like an Askew, of the astonishing, indomitable resilience of the human spirit. The creak of the windlass has fallen silent. The cold stone chambers are now tourist attractions. But the questions raised by that simple, brutal frame of wood and rope remain. What is the true nature of justice? What is the price of a confession? And how do we, as a society, guard against the temptation to believe that truth can ever be found at the breaking point of a human being? The story of the rack is a testament to the fact that you can break a body, you can manufacture a confession, but you can never, ever torture a lie into a truth. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the history of one of the world's most painful devices. The story of torture is often grim, but it is a vital part of understanding the long, and often brutal, struggle to define what it means to be human, and what it means to be just. If you found this deep dive into the history and psychology of the rack compelling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Torture History for more explorations into the darker corners of our past. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What other historical instruments or practices do you think deserve a closer look? Do you believe the principles that justified the rack still echo in our world today? Your engagement helps our channel grow and allows us to continue unearthing these important and often forgotten stories. Until next time, remember that history is not just about the past. It's a mirror held up to the present.